Oh, I'm David Graeber. I'm a professor I'm David Graeber. I'm a professor of anthropology at the London School of Economics right now.
How did you become an anthropologist?
Good question. I usually attribute it to my upbringing. My parents were a working class family, but they were kind of working class intellectuals, you might call them. Their house was full of books. And I always noticed it was kind of interesting that they didn't really have a whole lot of books of critique. I think they had like volume 1 of Marx's Capital somewhere. But for the most part, I think most people actually have to work 9 to 5, don't really need books telling them why it's bad. They had a lot, instead of history books, anthropology books and science fiction books. Basically, they just wanted to know about something else, anything else, whether it's in the past, in the future, someplace far away. And I started reading anthropology books from an early age. My parents were interested in that sort of thing. I became fascinated, when you're 12, or you're into code, became interested in translating hieroglyphics, Maya hieroglyphics. For a while, I actually got discovered by some Maya archaeologists, and I ended up going to some fancy high school as a result. They were planning on sending me off to become a Maya expert. Needless to say, got over that phase. But then when I went to college, I decided I really wanted to become an anthropologist after all. It's something I was interested in one way or another my entire life.
So you're especially, at least for the wider public, known for your writings and opinions about anarchy and public movements.
Mm-hmm.
So can you tell me what's the situation of Occupy, for example? Straight to the...
At the moment, Occupy has become a multiplicity of different projects, at least in the United States. It's not gone by any means, but it's broken into a whole variety of different things. For example, there's people working on occupied farms, there's other people working on debt movements, there's people working on anti-eviction projects, there's people working on mutual aid, almost anything you could possibly imagine, actually. So, in a way, I think when we realized that, first of all, we were facing really heavy police repression in public spaces, essentially they revoked the First Amendment in terms of freedom of assembly. It doesn't exist anymore. When that happened, and when the sort of people we thought were our allies, the sort of moderate left, progressive types, really didn't come to our aid and make an issue out of it, we realized we kind of had to move into a more long-term perspective. So I think what people are really working on is retrenching and building on what really is our strongest thing we did, which is to create a culture of direct democracy and direct action. People who are trained in that kind of skills, who know how to facilitate meetings, who know how to organize a street action. And we're gradually sort of building up a foundation so that the next financial crisis, the next natural disaster, we're going to be in a position to be the first out on the streets doing something about it.
There was a major, was it Occupy-related movement you talked about in the anthropological notes about the students occupying the school.
Oh,
is it
in
related?
London right now, yeah. Well, that's. I mean, the student movement in London in 2010 was actually before Occupy, and I mean there were dozens of at least 14, 15 student occupations right at the same time when it was the anti-cuts movement. And the first phase of that, well, I mean, they put through the educational reforms and effectively, semi-privatized the system, but it's really come up again, and it's quite dramatically and quickly, out of nowhere, it seemed. I'd kind of given up. I figured it was done with, and suddenly there's mass numbers of students fighting police in the streets. I mean, the government response has been much more harsh and punitive than it has been in the past. They just immediately started beating people up and attacking and arresting and so forth. But that shows how they're a little bit in a panic, because they really weren't counting on this. And the nice thing is that the last time was really a defensive game. They were trying to head off certain reforms before they happened. The tripling of tuition fees specifically. And this time, since we lost that battle, ironically, we're now in a better strategic position because now we're setting the agenda. We're the ones on the offensive. And the people are coalescing around a call to restore a free university system, devoted culture, to change the basic idea of what education is and is supposed to be about. I think it's very exciting.
Okay, so the Anthropological Knot Symposium, in which we're right now, it was about anthropology's role as a discipline and anthropology's role as engaging in the society. So, what's your opinion? Should anthropology engage more in the lives of the people it is studying?
I've always felt that anthropology has something to offer, and that in a way it resists when people wanted to contribute. It almost has this reluctance to have a social impact that I find a little difficult to understand. I wrote a book called Fragments of an Anarchist Anthropology, and I've got all sorts of flack as a result. Everybody now calls me the anarchist anthropologist, which is annoying because it's not like anybody ever talks about the social democratic anthropologist, conservative anthropologist, socialist anthropologist. But what I was talking about in the book was really just anarchists, utopians, people are trying to imagine what a social possibility, different social possibilities might be, are constantly turning to anthropologists and saying, well, you got the information, what are some other ways that society could be run? And it's odd that anthropologists tend to resist, they don't want to say anything that might imply they're romanticizing other societies or exoticizing. So, while I don't think anthropologists should all go off and join social movements and they have some kind of responsibility, it seems to me if people are just asking you to help, you might not, a few of you might actually try, lend your knowledge to people who want to use it to do some good in the world. Why not? Although I also feel, as I emphasized today, that the utopian moment, as I call it, in academia and scholarly life, the ability to think about things that are just interesting inherently in for their own sake, is equally important. And then these two things aren't actually contradictory with each other. In a way, they could well be mutually reinforcing.
And so you think you can change the world with anthropology?
Did I say that?
No, do you?
I think that anthropology has something to contribute to any project of social transformation. Because anthropology, in a way, it's created an archive, a compendium of past social experiments. There's a lot of what we call cultures, societies, could equally well be conceived as past social movements that were in effect effective, that managed to attain their goals and reconstitute society the way that they felt society should be reconstituted. And there's a vast record of people who have tried to change the world in different ways and succeeded in doing so. And it seems foolish to go off and start such a transformation without at least taking into consideration the ways that other people have done it before. And one thing that always annoys me is that when people talk about revolutionary projects, we only talk about 100 years. Essentially starting with the French Revolution, or the American Revolution, and going on through the Paris Commune, the Russian Revolution, Spain. There's this list of things, and you just hear about them over and over and over and over again. And you just, hear people, the 17th argument you've heard about Kronstadt or something like that. It's over and over again. Hearing every aspect of certain events. And it's not like those are the only revolutions that ever took place in world history. It's not like those are the only events that could be relevant. There's thousands of years of history of people who had projects of creating a new world along the grounds of certain ideals, often egalitarian ideals, that somehow we managed to eliminate from consideration and make up the sort of barriers in our heads and say, oh, those are primitives, or that's a different type of society, or not modern, and therefore they're irrelevant to us. But I don't think they are.
How do you see the future of the discipline?
Well, it's really hard to say. It depends on institutional factors that are not entirely under our control. There's a broad internationalization of anthropology, which is going to lead it in many different directions in different places. I think the hegemony of American anthropology is very much fading. I think that's a good thing. American anthropology is kind of falling increasingly into a doldrums. There's really not a lot going on, but a lot of other places seem quite vibrant, and we're in a moment where I think anthropology could ideally be reconstituted as a genuinely global planetary discipline, which break free of the old colonial boundaries, and where it's a matter of everyone examining everyone else and taking advantage of that sort of diversity of perspectives to really enrich our self-understanding more generally. I mean, you see more and more projects. I'm sponsoring one. I have a friend from Korea who wants to go to study magic use among the English. I think this is great. This is exactly the sort of thing we need more of. A genuine global discipline where we take advantage of the insight that you can have from looking at a social environment which is not immediately familiar to you, because you always get an outsider's perspective. But if you look at every possible perspective about every other there's an infinite variety of perspectives that we could create.
One last question, which is a personal one. What are your hopes for the future?
My hopes? Well, I'm sort of looking forward to a broad social revolution which will eliminate the state and capitalism and create a truly free society. But I think that's a long-term project. I don't really know how long it will take.
Okay, thanks a lot for the interview.
Sure.